The jungle was alive with strange sounds, but Jack moved carefully, keeping his steps light on the damp ground. He had been stranded here for days, surviving on bitter fruit and rainwater. The alien planet's twin moons cast a faint silver glow through the thick canopy. Every shadow looked like it could hide something that wanted to kill him. He had learned to listen, to notice when the jungle changed. Tonight, it changed. The usual hum of insects and distant growls stopped, replaced by a single sound. It was sharp, high, and desperate, a scream. Not the roar of a predator, not the cry of an animal. This was a voice. A living being was in pain. Jack froze, his heart pounding. He had been warned, even before the crash, that in alien jungles some predators use sounds to lure prey. But then the scream came again, louder, filled with panic and a strange metallic echo. Whoever it was, they didn't have much time. He gripped the small machete he had scavenged from the wreck and pushed through the undergrowth. Vines brushed against his face. Thick roots tangled around his boots. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, burnt metal. He followed the sound, every step faster than the last. The scream cut off suddenly, replaced by rapid, shallow breaths. Jack crouched low, moving toward the faint glow ahead. Through the thick leaves, he saw a clearing lit by dim orange lights embedded in the ground. At the center was a strange metal structure, half machine, half net. Tangled in it was a figure. She was tall, her skin a shimmering silver blue that reflected the light like water. Her hair was dark and braided, but strands had come loose, sticking to her sweat-covered face. She struggled against the thick wire-like cords cutting into her arms and legs. Each time she moved, the cords tightened, making the lights on the trap pulse brighter. Her eyes snapped to Jack as soon as he stepped into the clearing. They were large, bright, and full of fear. She shouted something in a language he didn't understand, her voice hoarse. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Jack stepped closer, scanning the trap. It wasn't human-made. The metal was old but still strong, with strange symbols carved along its frame. It looked like it had been built to hold something much bigger than her. His instincts told him to cut her free, but his mind kept screaming that this was too easy. The air was too still. The clearing was too quiet. He took one cautious step, and a faint vibration hummed under his feet. The trap wasn't just holding her. It was connected to something. Maybe a signal. Maybe bait. His eyes flicked to the tree line. Between the shadows, something moved. Slowly. Watching. The woman winced as the cords bit deeper into her skin. A thin line of bright blue blood slid down her arm, glowing faintly. She made a desperate motion with her head, pointing toward the trees, then back at him. He understood. Danger was coming. He stepped closer anyway. The machete's blade caught the dim light as he brought it up and sliced through one of the cords. It snapped with a sharp metallic ping. At that exact moment, the ground beneath him clicked, and a low, vibrating sound rippled through the air. From deep in the jungle, a growl answered. It was low at first, then grew louder, deeper, until it seemed to shake the leaves above. Jack's grip tightened on the machete. His eyes darted around, searching the shadows. The sound was getting closer. The woman twisted in the trap, panic flashing across her face. She was shouting again, more urgently this time. Then, between the glowing trunks of the alien trees, he saw them. 3 figures emerged, moving with a slow, confident stride. They were tall, their bodies covered in scaled armor that glistened like wet stone. Their heads were long and narrow, with ridges along the top and sharp teeth visible even with their mouths closed. Each carried a spear tipped with jagged bone. Their eyes burned with a dim red glow, locking first on the woman, then on Jack. The one in front let out a hiss that sounded almost like laughter. They spoke to each other in a series of clicks and growls, the words unfamiliar but the tone clear. Mockery. They weren't afraid of him. To them, he was just another piece of meat in the jungle. Jack's mind raced. If he attacked, he would die. If he ran, she would die. He scanned the ground, looking for anything, rocks, sticks, anything he could use. The hunters spread out, moving slowly to box him in. The woman's breathing was fast, her eyes darting between him and the hunters. A plan began to form in Jack's mind, risky and stupid, but it was the only one he had. He adjusted his grip on the machete and took a deliberate step back, making it look like he was retreating. The leader tilted his head, following Jack's movements with those glowing eyes. Jack took another step, then another, letting them believe he was afraid. His heart pounded in his ears. He kept his eyes on the hunters, but was already mapping the path back to the trap. He would have one chance, lure them away, then circle back. The growl from the leader deepened. One of the others moved to cut him off, spear lowering. Jack took a deep breath, turned, and bolted into the trees. The hunters roared and gave chase, their heavy footsteps thudding behind him. As the jungle swallowed them, the clearing fell silent again, except for the sound of the woman's breathing, waiting in the trap, unsure if the human who had appeared would return. Jack ran through the thick jungle, weaving between trees and leaping over tangled roots. The ground was wet and slippery, but he kept his balance, pushing himself faster. Behind him, the hunter's heavy footsteps followed, along with the sound of snapping branches. They were strong and fast, but not as quick in tight spaces. He used that to his advantage, ducking under low vines and sliding down a muddy slope. The glowing red eyes of one hunter flashed behind him for a moment, then vanished as Jack swerved sharply to the left. His chest burned from the effort, and every breath tasted of damp earth. He counted his steps, knowing he couldn't keep running forever. He needed them far enough from the trap to give him time to circle back. A distant roar echoed from another direction. Jack froze for a second. It wasn't the hunters. This was something else. Something bigger. Even the hunter's footsteps slowed. Jack crouched low in the shadows, watching as the three reptilian shapes regrouped a few meters away. They looked around nervously, as if deciding whether to keep chasing him or avoid whatever had made that sound. The leader growled something to the others. Two of them turned and moved away, their spears ready, scanning the darkness. The leader stayed, sniffing the air like he could smell Jack's sweat. Jack didn't wait for him to find the scent. He darted sideways, disappearing into the ferns. He moved as silently as he could, keeping low. The noise of the hunters faded behind him, replaced by the rustle of leaves under his boots. The memory of the woman's terrified eyes burned in his mind. If he didn't get back soon, she would either bleed out from the trap's wires or be taken by whoever set it. When he finally spotted the faint orange glow of the clearing again, his stomach tightened. One of the hunters had stayed behind. The reptilian stood at the edge of the trap, circling the woman like a predator deciding the best time to strike. She wasn't struggling anymore. Her head hung low, her breathing slow and shaky. Jack scanned the ground, spotting a fallen branch thick enough to use as a weapon. He grabbed it and tested its weight. It was heavy but solid. He needed a distraction, something to make the hunter move away from her. His eyes landed on a small rock near his foot. He picked it up and tossed it into the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. The sound was enough to make the hunter turn his head. Jack moved quickly, creeping forward until he was only a few steps behind. The hunter shifted again, his back now fully to Jack. Jack gripped the branch with both hands, swung it as hard as he could, and struck the back of the hunter's head. The reptilian let out a sharp hiss and stumbled forward, but he didn't go down. Instead, he turned, red eyes glowing with fury. Jack didn't hesitate. He swung again, aiming for the side of the head. This time, the hunter dropped to one knee, his spear clattering to the ground. Jack dove for the spear, grabbing it before the alien could recover. The weapon was heavier than it looked, but it felt solid in his grip. He pointed it toward the hunter, who hissed again but backed away slowly, his eyes now calculating. Then, without warning, the alien turned and ran into the jungle, vanishing into the shadows. Jack didn't waste time. He ran to the woman, kneeling beside the trap. Her skin was cold to the touch, and the glowing blue blood on her arms and legs was spreading. He inspected the cords, sharp, metallic strands that tightened when pulled the wrong way. He slid the spear's jagged tip under one cord and twisted. The strands snapped with a faint spark. The woman's eyes fluttered open. She stared at him for a moment, then glanced toward the jungle, as if expecting the hunters to return any second. She whispered something, her voice weak. Jack didn't understand the words, but the urgency was clear. He cut another cord, then another, each time careful to avoid cutting her skin. Finally, with one last pull, the last cord broke. She collapsed forward into his arms, her body light but tense. He could feel her trembling. She tried to stand, but her right leg gave out immediately. The wound there was deep, the blue blood dripping steadily. Jack shifted her weight onto his shoulder. "We have to move," he muttered, even though she couldn't understand. They left the clearing quickly, moving in the opposite direction from where the hunters had gone. The jungle was darker now, the twin moons hidden behind thick clouds. Every step was a fight, roots catching at their feet, branches tearing at their clothes. He could hear her breathing, sharp and uneven, and knew she was close to passing out. Behind them, far off, came another roar from whatever massive creature had been lurking earlier. This time, it was closer. Jack didn't slow down. The sound of running water reached his ears, and soon they broke through the trees to find a narrow stream glistening in the moonlight. He followed it upstream, hoping it might lead to higher ground where they could hide. They found a rocky ledge overhanging the water, with enough space beneath for them to crawl in. Jack eased her down gently against the wall. She kept her eyes on him, still wary, but there was something else there now. Less fear, more hope. He looked at her leg, the wound glowing faintly in the dark. "We'll fix this," he said softly, though mostly to himself. The jungle outside was silent again, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. The hunters would return, and they would bring more with them. He glanced at the spear in his hand, feeling the weight of the fight ahead. For now, though, she was safe. For now, he had kept her alive. The night in the alien jungle was colder than Jack expected. A damp mist crept along the ground, clinging to his clothes and making his skin shiver. The sound of the stream beside their hiding spot was steady, but it couldn't cover the distant noises, the low growls, the soft rustle of leaves when something large moved in the dark. Jack kept the spear close, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the ledge. The woman sat with her back against the rock, her breathing slow but shallow. Her silver-blue skin seemed to dim in the cold, the glow from her wounds fading. Jack knew she was losing strength. He had no medical kit, no supplies except for a few strips of cloth he had torn from his shirt. He reached for her leg, but she tensed, her eyes sharp. "It's okay," he whispered, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. Slowly he moved closer, tearing a strip of cloth and wrapping it around the deep gash. She flinched when the fabric touched her skin, a soft hiss escaping her lips. Jack tightened the knot to stop the bleeding, then pulled back to give her space. She watched him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as if trying to read his thoughts. Then she reached to the small pouch at her belt, pulling out a crystal shard that glowed faintly green. She placed it against her leg wound. Jack's eyes widened as the cut began to close, the skin knitting together in seconds. The glow in her skin brightened slightly. He pointed at the shard. "That's incredible." She didn't understand his words, but the way she glanced at the shard and then tucked it away told him it was valuable, maybe rare. He also noticed she didn't use it on the cuts on her arms or the smaller injuries. She was saving its power. A sudden snap of a branch made them both freeze. Jack's grip tightened on the spear. The sound came from across the stream, deeper in the jungle. Two glowing red eyes appeared between the trees, low to the ground. They blinked once, then vanished. Jack stayed completely still, waiting. The woman's breathing quickened. A few moments later, the sound of footsteps came. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were trying not to be heard, but the wet ground betrayed them. Jack glanced at the woman. Her hand was on his arm now, her grip tight. The first hunter appeared from the shadows, moving along the far bank of the stream. He was taller than the others Jack had seen, his scaled armor darker, almost black. He carried a longer spear tipped with something that glimmered under the moonlight. Metal, not bone. His eyes scanned the area, and for a moment Jack thought he had spotted them. Then the hunter knelt by the water, dipping the spear's tip into the stream. The liquid hissed as if it touched something hot, and a faint cloud of steam rose. Jack realized with a sinking feeling that the spear wasn't just a weapon, it was coated in some kind of poison. The hunter stood again, sniffing the air. Jack pressed his back against the rock, keeping himself and the woman hidden in the shadows. The hunter lingered, his eyes scanning the ledge, but finally he moved on, disappearing into the jungle. Jack let out a slow breath. The woman was still holding his arm. She released it slowly, her eyes meeting his. This time, there was no mistrust, only shared relief. They stayed hidden for another hour, waiting for any sign that the hunter might return. When the jungle grew quiet again, Jack knew they couldn't stay. The ledge had kept them safe for one night. but the hunters were searching. Sooner or later, they would find this place. He helped her stand, supporting most of her weight. Her leg was stronger now, but she still limped. They followed the stream, moving as silently as they could. Jack kept glancing behind them, always expecting to see red eyes in the dark. After some time, the stream split into two paths, one narrow and shallow leading toward thicker jungle and the other wider flowing toward what looked like open land. Jack hesitated. Open land meant less cover, but the jungle path could trap them if hunters approached from both sides. The woman pointed toward the wider stream, her voice soft but certain. Jack nodded, and they followed it. The trees began to thin, and the ground grew firmer. The sound of the water was joined by something else, low, rhythmic thuds like drums in the distance. Jack's muscles tensed. He recognized patterns like that from survival training. It was a signal, a call. They crouched low as the stream opened into a small grassy plain lit by the moons. On the far side, Jack saw movement, tall figures standing around a circle of fire. At least a dozen of them. They were hunters, their spears stacked in the center. But these weren't the same ones he had fought. Their armor was different, lighter, and they had markings painted across their faces. The woman's eyes widened when she saw them. She whispered something quickly, her tone urgent. Jack couldn't understand, but he could guess this was another tribe. Whether they were friend or foe, he couldn't tell. One of the hunters at the fire turned and looked in their direction. Jack pulled her back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He didn't know how much longer they could keep running before someone caught them. Somewhere deep in the jungle behind them, the same massive roar from before echoed again, closer than ever. The sound made the distant hunters pause and look toward the trees. Jack gripped the spear tighter. Whatever was hunting them, it wasn't just the reptilian warriors anymore. Something else was out there, and it was getting closer with every passing moment. The roar rolled over the plain like thunder, shaking the air. The firelight across the stream flickered as the distant hunters shifted uneasily, their eyes fixed on the dark jungle behind Jack and the woman. Whatever was coming was powerful enough to make even these warriors hesitate. Jack crouched low, keeping himself hidden in the tall grass. The woman's grip on his arm tightened, her silver blue skin cold against him. She whispered something sharp and urgent, pointing toward the narrow strip of trees along the far side of the stream. He understood. If they stayed in the open, they were dead. They moved quickly, following the cover of the grass along the bank. The sound in the jungle grew louder, a heavy, pounding rhythm that shook the ground. Leaves and branches cracked as something massive forced its way through the trees. The air carried a strange scent, metal, smoke, and blood. Jack risked a glance over his shoulder. Between the trees, a dark shape emerged, so big it made the reptilian hunters look small. Its body was covered in thick, bone-like armor plates. 4 muscular legs carried its bulk forward, and a long, segmented tail swept side to side, smashing saplings in its path. Its head was wedge-shaped, with a wide mouth lined with jagged, needle-like teeth that glistened in the moonlight. 2 narrow eyes burned with a pale green glow. The creature let out another roar, and the sound seemed to press against Jack's chest, forcing the air from his lungs. The reptilian hunters across the stream shouted to each other, some grabbing their weapons, others backing away. The woman stumbled, her injured leg slowing her. Jack caught her before she fell, pulling her behind a cluster of thick reeds. The creature's massive head turned slightly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Jack held his breath. For a moment, it seemed to lose interest in their direction, turning instead toward the distant hunters. Then, with terrifying speed for its size, it charged. The ground trembled under its weight. The hunters scattered, their spears raised, but the creature smashed into them like a living boulder. One was thrown aside with a single swipe of its tail, his body hitting the ground with a sickening crack. Jack didn't wait to see more. He pulled the woman to her feet, and they moved along the stream as fast as they could without drawing attention. The roars, shouts, and the crash of combat filled the air, masking their movements. They reached the cover of the trees on the far side and kept going, deeper into the shadows. The sound of the battle faded behind them, replaced once again by the quiet, tense noises of the night jungle. Jack's legs ached and the woman's breathing was ragged. They needed to rest, but stopping now felt dangerous. Every time he thought they were safe, another sound in the dark made his heart race. A snap of a branch, a low growl, the distant splash of something moving through water. After another long stretch of careful movement, they came to a slope leading down into a narrow ravine. The walls were steep, covered in thick moss and vines, and at the bottom ran a shallow stream that glowed faintly blue. The light seemed to come from the water itself, casting strange patterns on the rocks. "This will hide us," Jack muttered to himself. They climbed down carefully, the woman leaning on him for balance. At the bottom, the air was cooler, the sound of the jungle above muted. He led her to a flat rock near the water, helping her sit. She bent forward, cupping her hands in the glowing stream and drinking deeply. Jack filled his own hands and took a sip. The water was cold and surprisingly sweet, the taste refreshing after hours of running. He felt some of the tightness in his chest ease. The woman looked at him, her eyes softer now. She spoke quietly, the tone almost questioning. Jack shook his head and spread his hands to show he didn't understand her words. Still, something passed between them, a silent agreement that they would survive this together. A rustle from above made Jack glance toward the edge of the ravine. A shadow moved along the top, pausing to look down. The shape was wrong for the reptilian hunters. It was smaller, faster. A figure crouched there, watching them. Jack stood, raising the spear. The figure didn't move for several long seconds, then suddenly dropped down into the ravine with the agility of a predator. It landed in a crouch, rising slowly. It was another alien, but not like the hunters or the woman. This one's skin was dark bronze, patterned with faint stripes that shimmered in the blue light. Its eyes were bright yellow, and it wore a bandolier across its chest filled with small, sharp blades. The alien tilted its head, studying them. Then it spoke, a low, rapid series of words in a language Jack had never heard. The woman tensed beside him, her expression shifting from fear to recognition. She replied quickly, her voice carrying both relief and urgency. The newcomer's gaze moved between them, then to the spear in Jack's hand. Slowly, it reached behind its back and pulled out a short, curved blade. Not as a threat, but as an offering. Jack hesitated, then lowered the spear. The newcomer stepped forward, handing the blade to him. Its weight was perfect, balanced for quick strikes. The woman said something again, her tone sharper now, and the newcomer nodded once. Without another word, it turned and started climbing back up the ravine, pausing only to gesture for them to follow. Jack looked at the woman. She met his eyes, and though they still held a flicker of uncertainty, she nodded. Somewhere behind them, far away but growing closer, the deep roar of the armored beast echoed again. There was no choice. They had to move. Jack gripped the new blade and helped her to her feet, ready to follow their new guide into the unknown. The climb out of the ravine was harder than Jack expected. The moss-covered rocks were slick, and the vines were strong but tore at his hands. The woman struggled with her injured leg, so Jack supported most of her weight while still keeping his eyes on the bronze-skinned alien ahead. Their new guide moved quickly, silent as a shadow, glancing back now and then to make sure they were following. At the top, the jungle was darker than before, and the canopy so thick that not even the moonlight could reach the ground. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic. Jack's instincts screamed that danger was near. The bronze-skinned alien seemed to sense it too. Every few steps it paused, head turning slightly as if listening to sounds only it could hear. They moved along a narrow trail, barely more than a gap between thick tree roots. The woman leaned on Jack's shoulder, her breathing soft but strained. She hadn't spoken since they started the climb, but her eyes stayed sharp, scanning the darkness around them. A low clicking sound echoed from somewhere to the left. The guide raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Jack froze, gripping his new curved blade tightly. The sound grew louder, joined by a faint rustling in the undergrowth. Slowly, shapes began to move between the trees. Thin, insect-like creatures with long, jointed legs and sharp mandibles that gleamed in the dim light. Their bodies pulsed faintly, as if glowing from within. The woman tensed beside him. Jack counted at least 6 of them, moving in a slow, circling pattern. The guide pulled a small blade from its bandolier, the metal catching the faint glow. The clicking became faster, more agitated. Without warning, one of the creatures lunged. Jack barely had time to react before the guide met it midair, slashing across its front. The alien's movements were fast, precise, each strike aimed to disable rather than kill outright. Jack swung his blade at another that came too close, the edge slicing through one of its legs. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched metallic sound, and fell back into the shadows. Two more came from behind, forcing Jack to spin and strike. The woman, despite her injury, picked up a thick branch from the ground and swung it hard, knocking one of the insect things sideways. The guide moved like a storm between them, blades flashing. Within moments, the creatures retreated, melting back into the darkness with a chorus of sharp clicks. Jack's heart pounded, his arms aching from the quick fight. The guide glanced at him, gave a short nod of approval, and motioned for them to keep moving. They didn't waste time. The clicking faded behind them, replaced once more by the damp silence of the jungle. After another stretch of tense walking, the trail opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a half-collapsed structure made of stone and metal, overgrown with vines. Jack recognized the shapes of the walls and doorways. It was old, but it was built with some kind of technology. The guide stepped inside first, checking the shadows before waving them in. Inside, the air was cooler. Moss covered most of the floor, and small glowing plants grew from cracks in the stone. The guide pointed to a low bench-like slab, and Jack helped the woman sit. She was pale now, her skin's silver-blue glow weaker than before. The guide reached into a pouch and pulled out a small vial filled with a swirling golden liquid. It handed it to Jack and gestured toward the woman. Jack hesitated. He didn't know what the liquid was, but the woman gave a faint nod. Carefully, he helped her drink. Almost instantly, her breathing steadied. Some color returned to her skin, and she sat a little straighter. She said something to the guide, her tone softer now. The guide responded with a short reply, then began pulling aside parts of the mossy floor, revealing a hidden compartment. From it, the guide took out a small device, something like a metal cube with faint markings on each side. When it pressed the top, the cube expanded, unfolding into a holographic map. Lines of glowing light showed the jungle, rivers, and mountains. One section was marked with a pulsing red dot. The guide tapped it, then pointed at Jack and the woman. Jack understood enough. It was showing where they needed to go. Probably a safe place, maybe a settlement. But it was far. Too far to reach without being found. Before he could ask anything, a deep roar rolled through the jungle again. This one was closer, so close the walls of the ruined structure trembled. The woman's eyes widened and the guide snapped the map closed. It motioned for them to follow, urgency in every movement. They left the ruins quickly, heading into another narrow path that sloped downward. The sounds of pursuit were clear now, branches breaking, heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The armored beast from before was tracking them. Jack tightened his grip on the curved blade. The guide moved ahead, cutting through vines, leading them toward a faint glow in the distance. The woman stumbled but kept going, her hand gripping Jack's arm tightly. The glow grew brighter until Jack realized it wasn't light from the moons. It was the shimmer of water. They reached the edge of a wide river, the surface reflecting streaks of pale green and gold from strange plants along its banks. The current was strong, swirling with hidden force. The guide looked at them, then pointed to the other side. Jack's stomach sank. Swimming across with the woman in her condition would be dangerous, but the roars behind them left no choice. The guide stepped into the water first, moving fast but steady. Jack helped the woman in, the cold shock making her gasp. They pushed forward, the current tugging at them, trying to pull them downstream. Halfway across, the beast roared again, this time right at the riverbank they had just left. Jack didn't look back. He just tightened his hold on the woman and forced himself forward. The guide reached the far side first, turning to pull them out. They collapsed onto the wet grass, gasping for air. The roars faded slightly, but Jack knew it wasn't over. The beast would keep coming. It would never stop until they were either dead or it was. The grass on the far bank was slick with dew, clinging to Jack's clothes as he pushed himself up. His chest rose and fell with deep, ragged breaths. Beside him, the woman lay on her side, coughing softly, her silver-blue skin glistening under the faint green glow from the strange plants nearby. The guide stood a few steps ahead, scanning the dark jungle beyond. its head tilting slightly as if listening for danger. The river behind them roared with the force of its current, but it wasn't enough to mask the sound they all dreaded: heavy footsteps crashing through the trees on the far bank. The beast had reached the water. Jack looked over his shoulder just in time to see the massive silhouette at the edge, its glowing green eyes fixed on them. Its armored head lowered, and for a moment Jack thought it might try to swim. But the current was strong, and the beast seemed to sense the risk. Instead, it began pacing the shore, searching for a way across. The guide motioned sharply for them to move. They followed, their steps quick but cautious, weaving between tall roots and thick patches of fern. The jungle on this side was different, quieter, almost unnaturally so. There were no insect clicks, no distant growls. It was as if everything living here had learned to stay silent. Jack kept one arm around the woman, steadying her as they climbed a gentle slope. The plants here gave off a faint bioluminescent light, enough to see without the moons. Strange vines hung from the trees, swaying slightly even without wind. The air felt heavier, each breath carrying the scent of something sharp and metallic. The guide stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Jack froze, listening. At first he heard nothing, then a faint rustle ahead, followed by a slow, dragging sound. Out of the shadows emerged a figure. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over sharp bones, its eyes glowing faint yellow. The movements were stiff, almost jerky, as it stepped into the faint light. The woman gripped Jack's arm, whispering something fast in her language. He didn't need a translation to know she was afraid. The guide reached for one of its small blades, but it didn't attack. Instead, it crouched low, making a short series of clicking sounds. The pale figure tilted its head, staring at them for a long moment before slowly backing away into the dark. Jack exhaled slowly, but the guide didn't relax. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't friendly. It had simply decided not to fight now. They kept moving until the slope leveled out into a narrow ridge. From here, Jack could see parts of the jungle stretching away under the faint moonlight, the river cutting through it like a silver thread. The guide pointed toward a distant cluster of lights, barely visible through the haze. It was far, but it looked like a settlement. Before they could start toward it, a sound from behind froze them in place, a low, rumbling growl that was far too close. Jack's stomach tightened. The beast had found a way across. The guide said something sharp and urgent, then broke into a run. Jack and the woman followed, their footsteps pounding against the moss-covered ground. Branches whipped against Jack's face as they darted through the trees. The growl grew louder, joined by the crash of undergrowth as the armored creature closed in. They burst into another small clearing, but this one was different. A ring of ancient stone pillars surrounded a flat slab in the center, the surface carved with deep grooves. The guide ran to one of the pillars and pressed a hand against it. The stone glowed faintly, lines of light racing along its surface toward the center slab. The woman looked at Jack, eyes wide, as if she knew what this place was. The air felt charged, every hair on Jack's arms standing on end. The beast crashed into the clearing's edge, its huge form illuminated by the faint light from the stone. Its head swung side to side, locking onto them. With a roar, it charged. The guide shouted something and dove to the side. Jack pulled the woman with him just as the beast's massive tail smashed into one of the pillars, cracking it in half. The stone's light flickered but didn't go out. Jack gripped the curved blade tightly. If the beast reached them, there would be no time to run. The woman, breathing hard, reached into her pouch and pulled out the same green shard she had used before. She pressed it against the grooves in the stone slab. The reaction was instant. Light exploded from the carvings, shooting upward in a narrow beam that pierced the canopy. The beast stopped mid-charge, its head snapping toward the light as if in pain. It let out a deafening roar, shaking its head violently. The guide moved quickly, circling behind the beast and slashing at the gaps in its armor with precise strikes. Jack joined in, darting forward to cut at the creature's exposed legs. The beast lashed out with its tail, nearly knocking him off his feet, but he rolled aside just in time. The woman shouted something, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. The beam of light from the slab began to pulse, each flash sending a visible ripple through the air. The beast staggered, its movements slowing. Jack saw his chance. He rushed forward, leaping onto one of the broken pillars to gain height. With both hands, he drove the curved blade down into the softer flesh at the back of the beast's neck. The creature roared one final time, its massive body thrashing before collapsing to the ground with a crash that shook the clearing. The light from the slab faded slowly, leaving only the dim glow of the plants around them. Jack stood still, breathing hard, his hands trembling. The woman was staring at him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes shone brighter than before. The guide gave him a single, approving nod. The jungle was silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. Somewhere in the distance, other sounds began to rise. Calls, drums, and the faint echo of more footsteps. Whatever had been hunting them was dead, but the danger was far from over. They still had a long way to go before reaching the safety of the lights on the horizon. The air in the clearing was still heavy with the smell of the beast's blood, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Jack's throat. Its massive body lay motionless, the green glow fading from its eyes. Jack pulled the curved blade free from the back of its neck, wiping it on the moss-covered ground. His arms ached, his chest burned from the fight, but there was no time to rest. The distant drums were growing louder. The guide moved quickly, scanning the edge of the clearing. It spoke sharply in its language, gesturing toward the distant lights on the horizon. The woman was already on her feet, though she leaned heavily on the pillar for support. Her silver blue skin glowed faintly again, but Jack could see how tired she was. They left the clearing at a brisk pace, slipping into the thick cover of the jungle. The path ahead was uneven, and roots twisted underfoot, but the guide navigated it without hesitation. Jack stayed close to the woman, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Every so often he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see another predator charging after them. The drums echoed through the trees, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Jack couldn't tell if they were moving toward the source of the sound or away from it. The woman whispered something to the guide, her tone low and urgent. The guide gave a short reply and quickened their pace. They soon reached a narrow ravine, the walls slick with moss and vines. The guide didn't stop to climb down. Instead, it leaped across to the other side, landing in a crouch. Jack looked at the gap. It was wide, but not impossible. He helped the woman step back for a short run, then supported her as she jumped. Her foot slipped on the edge, but Jack caught her in midair, pulling her up to safety. The ground here sloped upward, and the trees thinned slightly. The air was cooler, and faint moonlight broke through the canopy. From the higher ground, Jack could see more of the horizon. The cluster of lights was clearer now, small, warm glows, like campfires or lanterns. It looked close, but he knew distance could be deceiving in the jungle. The guide pointed toward it. Safe, it said in broken, heavily accented English. Jack raised an eyebrow. This was the first time he'd heard the alien speak his language. But before he could ask anything, a shout rang out behind them. Figures moved between the trees, fast and silent. Their scaled armor reflected the moonlight. Reptilian hunters. Jack counted at least 6, maybe more. They had spread out in a crescent, trying to cut off escape. The guide growled something under its breath and motioned for them to follow a steep side path. They ran hard, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. The woman's breathing was sharp, but she didn't slow. Arrows hissed through the air, striking trees and the ground around them. One grazed Jack's arm, leaving a shallow cut. He gritted his teeth and kept going. The path narrowed, forcing them to move in single file. Ahead, the guide suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. Jack saw why. The ground ended abruptly in a sheer drop, a rocky cliff overlooking a deep gorge. Far below, a river shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The hunters' shouts grew louder. They were closing in from both sides. The guide glanced at Jack, then at the woman, then pointed toward a narrow vine bridge stretched across the gorge. It looked ancient, the ropes frayed, the wooden planks uneven. One wrong step and they'd fall straight into the rushing water below. The woman stepped forward without hesitation. Jack followed close behind, the bridge swaying under their combined weight. Halfway across, the sound of arrows returned. One struck a plank just ahead of Jack, splintering the wood. He grabbed the rope side and kept moving. The guide was the last to cross. As soon as its feet hit the far side, it slashed the ropes with a blade. The bridge collapsed, falling away into the darkness below. The hunters skidded to a stop at the cliff edge. their hisses echoing in frustration. They didn't wait to see what the hunters would do next. The guide led them down a winding trail carved into the cliffside. It was narrow and slippery, but the further they descended, the more the sound of the drums faded. At the bottom, the trail opened onto a wide, open area lit by dozens of fires. Structures made of wood, stone, and metal scraps stood in loose rows, and alien figures moved between them. Some stopped to stare at the newcomers, their expressions wary. The guide spoke quickly to two tall figures near the entrance, gesturing toward Jack and the woman. One of the figures nodded and waved them inside. They were led to a small shelter at the edge of the camp. Inside, it was warm, with a low fire burning in the center. The woman sank onto a soft mat made of woven leaves, her body finally relaxing. Jack sat beside her, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders for the first time in days. The guide knelt across from them, its yellow eyes studying Jack. "Here, safe," it said again in its rough English, "but hunters, not stop. They want her." Jack looked at the woman. She met his gaze, her eyes bright in the firelight. She said something softly, and though he didn't understand the words, he understood the meaning. "Thank you." Outside, the camp was quiet except for the crackle of fires. But Jack knew the guide was right. This safety was temporary. The hunters would come again, and when they did, he would be ready. Because whatever happened next, he wasn't leaving her behind.